I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Poured Over, and I am so happy to have Alison L, who's the translator for Annie Ernaux, and Dan Simon, her U.S. publisher. You know Annie's name because she just won the Nobel Prize for Literature last month. And if you haven't yet read her, we have some suggestions for where to start, but I'm trying not to nerd out too hard about the translation piece, but I'm so excited for all of this. But Dan, you have been publishing Annie since 1991 in the United States, and Seven Stories Press is a really big part of Annie's story. So would you tell us how you came to find Annie's work and also how she became part of Seven Stories?
Sure. Hi, Miwa. Hi, Alison. Yeah, I mean, Annie was published by Gallimard. It's one of the great French publishers since I think 1974, even longer. So you're talking, basically 50 years, quite incredible. At the time that I was introduced to her work by someone named Samuelson. Monsieur Samuelson ran something called the French Book Publishers Office, which is the French government's kind of exporter of French book culture and French book rights. It still exists. It's run now by my friend Alice Tassel. And back then in the late 80s, probably 89, Mr. Samuelson took me aside and he said, I really feel like this author, Annie Ernaux, is kind of in line with your philosophy as a publisher and the kind of publisher that you are. And I read two very short books in French. I could read French fluently. I had lived there for 3 years. And these were a woman's story in a man's place. One is a portrait of her father. One is a portrait of her mom. They're breathtakingly short. They're very readable in the sense that her sentence structure is very direct and immediate. If I can say this, I don't know if Alison agrees with this, but Annie Ernaux's writing style is quite consistent with what I consider good English language writing style, which is short, direct sentences, down to earth language. There's nothing kind of highfalutin about it on the sentence structure level, very kind of earthy. And I really like that. And this kind of goes against the grain of what we think of as French literary style, which is a bit more Baroque and, Proustian, Proust, or any one of a number of writers that you could imagine who are kind of more upper class. There's even a kind of aristocracy element. The French literary society is very elite. And here was this working class girl talking about immediate things in a very visceral way. And I was quite overwhelmed. We signed up these books. And at the time, Annie was translated by someone who Alison and I both still hold in very high regard, who died, Tanya Leslie, who was a Scot. She was a Scot, and she lived in Paris, but she kind of did like, more what you would call business translation type things. There was no other literary author, but she translated Annie for us. I can't remember how we met her, but at the time she really captured Annie's voice in English. And it's even more true now with Alison, but even then, these books didn't lose much in translation, partly because of how Annie writes and partly because of being very fortunate in her translators. So, and then it was off to the races.
Okay, but before we get to Alison, I do want to ask about Seven Stories Press, because that is the name of your house. And Annie is one of the 7 authors who essentially you built a house out of. You started with Nelson Algren.
Yeah.
And then, so let's just tell that story, because I think it's a rather sweet story. And I think there might be some folks who are listening who don't know that story.
Yeah, it is kind of a sweet story. So I had started publishing Nelson Algren in the mid 80s. I worked for a guy named Glenn Thompson. I was an assistant at W.W. Norton, great independent publishing house. And one of their distributees was a company that had started in England by an American, a Black American publisher named Glenn Thompson. And so Glenn was the most exciting person walking around the quadrangle. W.W. Norton was then and still is built around a quadrangle at Fifth Avenue and 42nd Street. And I was in the middle and the inner row. The outer row editors had windows. We in the inner row had no windows, but everybody had to walk past my office. So the chairman of the board, George Brockway, was in one corner, and the treasurer, Vic Schmalzer, was another corner. And Glenn, as a distributee, Glenn Thompson, he had started this company in England, then bought it back and started an American version. And I used to see them kind of going back and forth, and I got to know Glenn a little bit. And he was the most exciting person at Norton. He was a brilliant publisher, very exciting. And so when I started reading Nelson Algren and learned that all his books are out of print, I brought that to Glenn, and he said, he basically, I was already working for him as a freelance editor. And he said to me, why don't you see if you can get the rights, and I'll publish them, and we'll give you an imprint, and you'll be the youngest person in publishing with your own imprint. He was really flattering me because I was doing good editorial work for him. And so, that's what happened is I went to the Algren's agent and I said I wanted to get the rights. And she was like, "Who are you?" And that was a very famous agent at the time named Candida Donadio. And she went to all his former publishers, Algren's former publishers, which included Doubleday and many others, and Putnam and FSG. And she said, "Won't you bring Algren back to print? There's this guy who wants to do it, and I don't know who he is." Like a kid, I was 26 years old at the time, and they all said no. And so she finally said yes to me.
Right.
And we started bringing out these books, and I bought the rights, which was the little piece, and Glenn paid for the printing and production, and they did quite well. And they started doing well, and I got to know people. Kurt Vonnegut had been a friend of Nelson Algren, so he agreed to do an introduction for one of the first ones, and that sort of thing. And then, we got going, and eventually when I decided to turn it into a company, Glenn was very generous and he gave us the backlist titles and everything. So we started with Nelson Algren, and then I had a company called Four Walls, Eight Windows. And I did that really with a partner, my friend John Oakes. And John and I had a good run for basically 10 years. And then we had a disagreement in 1995, and we decided to split the company in half. I could have continued to be a publisher or not, but I went to the authors that I considered to be my most important authors. And I basically said to them, if you want, I'll continue to do this, but I'm not going to do it without you. So those are the kind of core seven. And one of them was Octavia Butler.
Right.
And one of them was Project Censored, and one of them was a nutritionist, Gary Null, an alternative nutritionist, and one of them was Greek writer Vasilis Vasilikos, and one of them was a basketball writer, Charlie Rosen. It seems a little bit random now, but one of them was Annie. And it's a little reckless of them, frankly, to stay with me in doing this. And I think they did it just out of kind of impulsively. I don't think they should have. I mean, there was no certain future. But they did, and it meant a lot to me. So I didn't feel like I was doing this alone. And certainly Annie was terribly important to me. So was Nelson Algren. The estate of Nelson Algren, of course, was one of them. I didn't feel like I had control over it, and so it was really, the company was then named in their honor, and those are the people that thought I could do this, when I suppose to me I was like, I didn't know if I could do it or not. So it was kind of, I took a lot of strength from their impulsive, reckless decision, foolishly, to stay with me.
And Alison joined. Alison joined the fun. So, Alison, you became Annie's translator with 2017's The Years, which most people consider her masterpiece. I had a great time reading it. I think it's a fantastic, wildly interesting book. But I also love the way she brings together all of these different genres. Well, she mixes genres. I mean, this is something that everyone says about Annie, that she blends fiction and memoir and does what she can. But for you as a reader first, we're going to come back to you as a translator, but for you as a reader first, when was the first time you read Annie, and what was the book, and what did you think, and how did you end up here?
I read first book I read by Annie was in 1992, I think. And it was Simple Passion, Passion Simple. I've been given it as a gift, and I was really intrigued by the by the clarity and the simplicity and the, as she calls it, lapidary quality of the writing. And I immediately read in French La Place, A Man's Place, and A Woman's Story. And then I don't know when it was that I started reading them in translation as well. I read them in French first, but read the translations. It became another whole other aspect of it because I really admired Tanya Leslie's translations. She became the English voice of Annie Ernaux for me. That's how I began.
Dan, how many books did you do with Tanya as the translator?
We did, the first two, certainly, A Man's Place and A Woman's Story, and then several others, certainly. Yeah, Exteriors, La Vie Extérieure, Exteriors.
And Passion Simple.
Passion Simple, that's true, Simple Passion.
La Honte.
Shame, definitely.
Happening. Wonderful Happening.
Happening is Tanya Leslie also. Yeah. There was then a period where I think Tanya was still alive, but maybe she wasn't available, any longer or something. I don't remember exactly what it was. And then there's several books that are done neither is kind of pre-Alison but post-Tanya, such as A Frozen Woman, Linda Coverdale, which is it's kind of interesting. Linda's a great translator too, and it's kind of interesting because that's the only one of Annie's books which is translated into a American voice. Like the slang, the references, the jokes, whatever. There's an American equivalent, and I admire Linda very much. But that book, to me, I still can't really visualize or accept Annie speaking in American.
Yeah, no, I can see that. She has a very, very distinctive style. I love the fact that she sort of describes herself as, brutally honest and working class and also sometimes obscene. And I'm just like, you are the best thing to come down the pike in a really long time.
Yeah, she talks dirty great.
She's exactly who she is. But the idea that now she has a Nobel for writing about her private life and women's lives in a way where she's taken the shame out of the equation. I mean, we're supposed to be running around like dainty little creatures, and she's just like, oh no, oh no, I have a whole new way of looking at the world. And it's really exciting to see. But Alison, do you remember when you realized that you were going to be translating The Years? Because The Years also is not your standard memoir. I mean, it's the biography of a time. It's sort of a socioeconomic study of France for 65 years. I mean, this is not a small project. It's less than 300 pages, but it's not a small project. I mean, can we talk about that from a translation?
Sure. Well, it was a huge and multi-layered project. There was a lot of research to do. But living in France, I picked up a fair bit of it, the names, but still. There was a lot of checking. But the thing that I was really delighted by was just the number of ditties and songs and silly kiddie jokes, because she really made music of them. It was just strings and strings and strings of them. And of course you could tell that these were rich with associations and with, you say one brand name, and of course you can think of 25 different things in your life. You can imagine how that would be for her, and you can imagine how it would be in your own life. And it actually became very rhythmical, and it was an amazing translation experience. But it took a long time to get to the point where the language started moving, because you have to start out sort of in English laying down rocks, and then a rock and a rock, building a wall. Okay. And it doesn't move, and it's just right next to the ground. And because you can't obviously start translating full sentences, really. Because my whole idea was to just stick absolutely close to the earth of her syntax, and build up, and you build and you build and you build, and finally something starts to move, and then you can gain some of the movement that you,
Yeah.
but in English, that you have sensed and been thrilled by in reading the French.
We worked intensely on the years, and it's funny, Miwa, you're asking, it's funny, Alison, to hear you talking about it, because it's such a daunting translation. It's like, in a funny way, it's like a very long poem, in the
Yeah.
sense of just the density.
Oddly enough, yeah.
But Alison, didn't you and I work together on a project previously, something unrelated? I don't think it was the first book.
Oh, too. We worked on the Disunited States, which
Oh
was
my God, you did
very, very dense book.
That's a
Mhm.
prose, Miwa. That's a very long prose book by a guy named Vladimir Posner, I think.
Posner, yeah, a different one.
There's a
that
more
everybody
famous
knows.
Vladimir Posner, but this is
Uh-huh.
it's a kind of historical. It's sort of like Let Us Now Praise Famous Men or something,
Got
and
it.
it travels across the U.S. I forgot about that. And what was the other one?
Infidels by Abdullah
And you did the
Tayyab.
first Abdel Attaya, right? Exactly. So we
Okay.
had worked together, and then I was wrestling with the years because it's so different. Like that's like the
Yes.
second incarnation of Annie Ernaux. Like I
Yes.
was in love with the author of A Man's Place, A Woman's
Mm-hmm.
Story, and the other books, and then here was this kind of something very different. And I was still wrestling with it. And Alison, I think you are my favorite translator at the moment, having done the Abdel Attaya. And we brought it to you, but we brought it to you without kind of realizing what we were asking.
Well, thank heavens you did.
Yeah, we did indeed.
But it took a long time because and Dan and I had a lot of discussions at first because the original did not really read like the sort of classic Annie Ernaux.
Yeah.
There were a lot of for instance, gerunds and continuous, the continuous verb tense, which
Yep.
she talked about a lot actually in
Yep.
the book. So there's ing forms, and which I translated as forms which in French are end in ant. Dan said this doesn't read really like Annie Ernaux, and in the he suggested putting in simple present forms, which was good, which is good. Good advice, but at first I really just went exactly with what
Yeah.
the same verb tenses.
Yeah, no, exactly. We had a great process. It was a real wrestling match. I think it was, it's great that we both had the regard for Tanya's translation that we did, but we had not an easy time of it. I think the book was stronger than both of us for a while, and the great thing that I adore Alison Strayer, and the great thing was just Alison, your ability to go the distance with me. It's like we just went, and it took, I don't know how long it took, but there were multiple
a couple of years. It was almost 2 years.
It was almost 2 years. And so just going the distance, you know what I mean? It's like we went, just like that was not obvious. And I think I was very difficult, and I wanted what I wanted, but Alison is, it's ultimately Alison's translation. So there was not exactly a power struggle, but there was kind of a power struggle. And I think we both won.
I think it was more of a discussion.
Yeah. I mean, it has to be Alison had to find the song, the music, had to find the voice, and so, at the end of the day, my role as an editor is to yield, but but I'm very opinionated, as Alison can tell you, so I'll fight her, but then at the end, it's really Alison has the last word, and it is a fantastic translation. And as we know, it won a number of awards.
Right.
Annie's not really part of that conversation.
Right.
It's not like at the end of the day, we do our best and we bring it to Annie, we kind of, drag it to Annie, and Annie decides. It's like Annie trusts us.
Right.
Her English is not, and thankfully, sometimes you have writers being translated and they want the final word, even though they don't really know.
Yeah.
And that's Annie has the great wisdom to kind of leave it to us. And I do, I defer to Alison in the end. It's a tremendous responsibility.
Alison, I want to come back to something about translation that I'm super curious about, because here you are, you're looking for the emotional truth, right? You've talked about building the wall from the words and the text and everything that you have, but you still have to find the emotional truth of what Annie is trying to do, because if that's not there, then we're not going to walk along the wall with you, right? I mean, that is a really fundamental piece of this. So here you are thinking and feeling in two languages, which is not always the easiest thing to do, and they're not always exactly aligned.
And they never will be.
Yeah, which I appreciate. No, I appreciate this, and I do love that. But you've also done 3 very different books. I mean, A Girl's Story is deeply intimate, and it's such a special book, but it's also really hard. And then Getting Lost, which is the diaries behind the novel,
Yeah.
A Simple Passion, which obviously your introduction to Annie. You're working in such different moments in this artist's career. I
Yeah.
mean, aren't you getting a little whiplash? I realize these are all sort of 2 years apart, but the voice is there, but you're working with a lot of different material.
Well, that there is something completely consistent there. It really is the current in the river, her voice, her spirit. It's very, I feel it very, very keenly. I mean, that's really the exciting part, one of the many exciting parts of translating a new book by her, because you get to know more, you get to know this voice more, you get to know another dimension of what you've already seen, but then it's never the same. It's never the same, Trey. I'm developing a bit of a glossary. I use the same, she uses a lot of the same words, and I use the same words to translate them with. And there's a certain kind of sentence sometimes that she has, a certain kind of, word order. But there's a whole other dimension that it's just brand new and a mystery.
Miwa, can I ask a question of Alison?
Sure.
So Alison, so we all got to spend some time together serendipitously right after Annie won the Nobel. She was scheduled to come to New York, and Alison flew down from, she was in Toronto at the time. And so the 3 of us had kind of like a pajama party for 3 days. It was really wonderful.
Yeah.
And we talked a lot. But one of the things that came up, Alison, if I remember correctly, is you said A Girl's Story is maybe your favorite.
I love all her books, but it's absolutely irreplaceable for me, because it just spoke to me so deeply, and in a way sort of gave me back part of my life, and it's a book that just keeps on expanding, with daily thoughts I have, or things I read, or things I dream.
For the listener, A Girl's Story, Annie, after not being able to deal with this part of her life for 50 years, couldn't write about it, finally feels she's able to go and write about herself as an 18-year-old.
Right.
And I find it one of the more difficult. I mean, it's a very substantial book, but she gives a self-portrait that is quite unforgiving of. Maybe unforgiving is the right word, or maybe the wrong word, but she's pretty harsh on herself.
She is.
I find it a difficult book for that reason.
Which I admire a lot, but she had to find a form that almost spoke more than she could actually say it. The medium was the message in a way.
Right.
Interesting. And it's also a very long book for her.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that makes a lot of sense to me. I've thought about the book a lot since you said that. Yeah, I also like it a lot, but it's a difficult book for me. For some reason,
eerie. It's sometimes very eerie.
It's very, I mean, she's writing about herself like shoplifting. She was an au pair in England. She's shoplifting. She loses her virginity. She gets slut bashed a lot. So, it's tough to deal with. I mean, I find it quite difficult, but I admire it a lot. She's not easy on herself.
No, she's not. But the distance, but the distance she's creating between Annie as we know her now as an older woman and Annie as an 18-year-old. I mean, there's so many moments too where she's wrestling with how to tell the story. I mean, that's one of the things I appreciate about reading her work, is she's always wrestling with, how do I tell the story? How do I find the truth in the silence? Like, she actually pauses in a way where we can, as the reader, take a step back and say, okay, wait a minute, what did I just experience? Where am I going? But I love the idea that she's just wrestling with this on the page, and she's unapologetic about everything. Yes, she's very hard on herself in this book, but she does also have a reason for doing what she's very stylistically deliberate.
Yeah.
And I think it's a little I think she made a lot of really interesting choices that I don't think a lot of other writers would do, but in the context of her larger work, it makes perfect sense, this book, to me. It's exciting and exhilarating, as hard as some of these books are, or moments in the books, I should say, can be. It's so exhilarating to see her just say, yeah. I mean, the idea, I want to go to Getting Lost for a second, because, she opens with I want to live a fable. And I can't believe, and all of this stuff that she says, I can't believe I was reliving Anna Karenina. Like, what am I doing? And I was thinking, yeah, what are you doing, lady?
Yeah.
All of these moments where she's just like raising the eyebrow, and yet she's absolutely right. Like, of all the people in the world, like, Getting Lost was actually, I think, a little bit more surprising for me in some ways than A Girl's Story, because I was just like, but you kind of did know better. I mean, at 18, you don't know anything, or you barely know anything. But, here, she's not 18 and Getting Lost, and oh wow, she is acting like a teenager when it comes to that dude from the embassy. I mean, it's wild, and she's just like, okay. I mean, we've all seen the line about the contact lens and where she found it.
This class.
But I mean, she's very just matter of fact, and it's kind of exciting to see where she's just like, yeah, here's the story.
Well, she says in this week's, New Yorker profile,
Yep.
In that piece goes high-low.
Yeah, completely.
High-low. I mean, she really does. And I kind of was like, really, did you have to say that about a few of the things that she says? But Annie loved that profile. She really liked it, which I'm really glad about. And I admire it also because, she has a kind of holistic view. But when she talks, she got Annie to talk about Getting Lost. And, when she talks about, I guess she describes going back to the journals that she hadn't looked at in years.
Yeah.
I think she had promised, doesn't she say that she had promised her lover that she would not look at the journal?
Yes, she did say that. She also said she would never write about him. She did promise him that she would not write about him.
And Alex got they had a great conversation. Alex got some really.
They had an amazing. I was there, and they had an amazing contact chemistry.
That's great.
Yeah,
it was really.
And so her going back to her journals and then realizing that it tells a different story. Than Simple Passion. And so, formally, it's really interesting. As you mentioned, Miwa, I've published and been the English language editor of Annie for 31 years.
Right.
But the last few years, it's been in collaboration with the publisher of Fitzcarraldo in England, Jacques Testa. And so we talked about Getting Lost. I think Jacques kind of said to me at some point, oh yeah, the next book we should do, of course, it should be Superb. Reading it, I also thought it was formally really interesting. It's her journal,
right?
But I presumably she's still crafting, selecting. I don't think you get the feeling from Annie that she's kind of, rather than writing it now in the way that maybe she did a Girl's Story. And I think maybe that's why we love A Girl's Story, is because she really did sit down. It's still going from the journals, but she wrote it in 2000, whenever it was, in the last decade. It was Getting Lost. She just kind of let it. It's just like she just let it be. And she was just appreciating what already was, that she had no idea that the journal of that time that she had kept in real time was formally as strong as it actually already was. I mean, that's how she talks about it anyway. So it's really good. I mean, I think people are always asking what they should start with these days. Since the Nobel, everybody's asking us what to begin with. And I think I don't want to answer that question anymore.
You don't have to.
Because all these different pieces, I go back and forth. I think we talked about it with Annie when she was here, and I think the consensus was A Man's Place and A Woman's Story, because those are kind of why not begin at the beginning? And even though that's not the beginning, but that's when she kind of landed on the map of literature with those books. But I think it's really personal and individual.
Yeah.
I think for some people, Getting Lost is the wrong book to start with. I think for some people, The Years is the wrong book you have to build up for them. And I think for other people, it's great. And I worry a little bit. I stopped telling everybody to start with A Man's Place, A Woman's Story because it's so long ago.
Right.
Like, do I really want to tell people to go read what Annie wrote 40 years ago, or do we want people to read what she wrote, most recently? So it's just personal.
She didn't. That was written in 1988.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, and that's the thing. Getting
I
lost is
understand. That's what I'm saying. It's like, do we want to ask people to go and start at the beginning and read what she was writing in 1988, or what she was writing in 2009 or 2016? And I just think you should go in, look at them all, taste them all, and pick the one you want to write. You want to read it right now.
There's so much to choose from, and
Yes.
honestly, they're so delightfly short.
Some of them, yeah.
Well, even the longer ones, though. Honestly, Dan, I
Oh,
mean,
interesting.
she's not going to deliver a manuscript that's 500, 600, 700 pages. It's just not who she is. I mean, if you look at her ethos and how she approaches the work and how she approaches her world and what she does, she's not particularly interested in suddenly, turning in Search of Lost Time. Although you could argue that, yes, The Years is her version.
I don't want to fetishize Annie. There's a little danger of doing that now, but she really can write breathtakingly short, and she can write a kind of normal length book, a kind of, I shouldn't say normal, but a kind of typical length book. But guess what? The book that we're publishing next fall, which Alison is translating as we speak, which is called The Young Man, is the shortest book we've ever published by her.
Okay.
Shorter by far than A Woman's Story in a Man's Place. Go figure. And in fact, when the French publisher sent it to me, I think I pictured it as a fax, so I guess it was an email.
Right.
I was like, what's this? I mean, it was like a long email. It was just so short. And then Alice actually at French Book Publishers Office said, well, they have to send you the published book. I'm going to get them to send it. And then I got an actual book and read this actual book. And it has a tremendous heft. I think it's Annie at the height of her powers. I mean, it is a story of a love affair with a much younger man. But it is really good. It's a complete full book. It has tremendous heft. But it's half the length of her previously shortest book. Alison, do you want to say anything about Le Jeune?
I noticed this in her books and even short text, but the young man connects up with another book. It's like, this is how I came to, and even a really short text that I translated a couple of years ago called Venice, or The Young Man of Venice, and it was published in Le Devoir in Montreal, nowhere else for the longest time.
Okay.
And so I published it for free. I translated it for free. And she said at the end, sort of very abruptly, and this reflection that I had, in the course of this relationship with this man she had a night with in Venice, became The Years. So go figure. Well, you'll see in Jeune Homme which book it sort of leads to, and they don't seem to connect. But then when you think, how does this connect? It's fascinating. And it's just just her oeuvre. It's just sort of just expands and expands and expands.
I don't remember which book it is.
It's happening.
Yeah.
But there's it's not, ce n'est pas évident. It wouldn't have been the one you guessed.
No, it wouldn't. But that's kind of the beauty of this world that we're in. And you can, and I want to stress this as well, you can pick up wherever you want. There's so much to work with. And these tiny, sublime, really smart, slightly aggressive. I mean, she's... well,
it's a really good Nobel.
As you can tell, I'm fangirling over her. But, before I let you guys go, because we are bumping up against time and I knew this would happen, but I do want to talk about something that Annie has been very, very sort of vocal about, is the idea that she doesn't like the definition of autofiction applied to her work, that she's just kind of like, listen, I do my thing. I tell my story. Yes, there's freedom in writing fiction, and I get to, walk away from my own internal critic and all of this. And I would like us all to say, do we really need genre? And yes, I mean, I'm a bookseller, so of course, genre impacts my world. But I do want to talk about this with you for a second, because Alison, you're a translator. Dan, you're a publisher. You've also written books and translated work as well. Like, genre, why are we still clinging to this? Can't we just let genre go? Can't we just let Anne write whatever she wants? I mean, the Nobel statement includes a moment about she's written these great memoirs. The Man Booker International was like, well, here, she's under fiction. I mean,
Yeah.
doesn't she get the last word?
In the end, that's sort of went against it.
It's really a moving target, Miwa.
Okay.
I mean, it's changing all the time. So when we first started publishing Annie, she would not let us categorize the work as either fiction or nonfiction, which was really, so, as Barnes and Noble, how do you know where to put it?
Right.
I mean, we had to respect this. So we never said in the early editions that it was fiction or nonfiction.
Right.
She had some terminology, kind of like sociological, ethnography, something like that.
Auto-socio, yeah.
Auto-social biography is my sort of
my
messy translation. Apologies.
I mean, I think what's interesting is that she's been very influential.
Yeah.
As a kind of creator of autofiction. So she's kind of been, I don't think there would maybe be that term and that subgenre were it not for her. But it is true that when you read Annie Ernaux, you kind of more likely are to feel it's about you, or about something very familiar to you, than that you're reading somebody who wants to tell you about themselves. She's not interested in herself in that way.
Right.
And so, it's not like a Knausgaard or somebody who wants to tell you about every minute of themselves because, they find that so interesting. It's kind of like she were a painter, and, she's got, somebody, a parent or a child or a sibling who's right there. So she'll paint them. She's the person that's right there. But so, but I just think it's changing all the time. It's kind of interesting. She was kind of flowing before the Nobel. She was kind of flowing into a more fiction-y space because it was being read as literature. But now I think since the Nobel, it's a little bit kind of being pulled almost in a more memoir nonfiction direction. And I mean, Svetlana Alexievich, very different, but it's kind of a little bit being pulled in that direction. But yeah, if you're saying, wouldn't it be nice if Annie can be the hammer that shatters the glass of genre? That's kind of exciting. I don't know. Alison, what do you think?
I just think as an object of contemplation, just looking at her whole oeuvre and thinking about it. I don't know if you'll come up with a new word to characterize it, but it would be nice to find some way of characterizing a body of work that just is.
How about Ernaux-esque?
That's what's happening.
Ernaux-esque.
I mean, why not? Ernaux-esque.
Yeah. Well, she talks about the transpersonal I.
Yes, exactly.
In the years, and I really, even in Getting Lost, which was so intimate, more and more I started seeing the transpersonal I. It was there was just a sort of a peak of where pleasure met suffering, and it's kind of just burst. It's just the transpersonal I was there for me.
I mean, here's the thing. I am not an 82-year-old French woman born in Normandy with a Nobel Prize under my belt, and yet there is so much for me to be able to key into in any of the books. And sometimes I'm, reading about her struggle with writing, and sometimes I'm thinking, oh, what did you just do? Oh, lady, what did you just do? There's so many different points, and that, for me as a reader, that's what I'm looking for. I just want someone to tell me a story. I just want to find the truth of my day-to-day in someone else's life. Yeah. I think that's interesting. I think it's fun.
I think you're a very good reader of her, Miwa. I like all the things you've said about
this. I really like what you say too.
Thank you.
Yeah, the New York Times Book Review put her in, the week she won the Nobel, she hit the list high up on the paperback nonfiction list. And I really like that because she's the most literary thing on that list.
Oh, yeah.
Paperback nonfiction, so it's like a book, it's that book about mushrooms and, I mean, it's really nonfiction. And then you get this literary stuff. So she's
Right.
kind of it's really like there was a palace coup in that nonfiction list to have something so literary there. So I really like that. But if she is going to be read as nonfiction, then she's making the whole idea of nonfiction kind of literary in a new way,
It's
so
pretty great. It's
yeah,
pretty great.
pretty great.
Alison L. Strayer, thank you so much. Dan Simon, it was great to be we could keep going, obviously, for hours and hours and hours, but it's really late in Paris, so we've got to let Alison get back to her life. But thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Annie Ernaux is our current Nobel laureate, and really, you've got, what, 20 books, Dan, that you've done?
No,
20
we
books?
have 12 with about 3 or 4 kind of in process.
Okay.
Alison's translating the jeune homme, and then
All right.
Alison's going to retranslate her first novel, which is called
Cleaned Out.
Cleaned Out.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a lot of ground to cover, and that's a lot of great reading for a lot of folks out there. So thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate you both.
Thanks, Miwa. Great to meet you.
Thank you, Mia.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.